My wife let her lover hurt our daughter. She never saw the consequences. The sirens tore through our quiet street, but it wasn't until I saw him, the man my wife was in love with, holding a blood-soaked towel to my daughter's head, that I realized my marriage was already dead. What I didn't know yet was how far I'd go to make them both regret the day they crossed me. Hey friends, if you've ever had the ground vanish beneath your feet and still found a way to stand, you're in the right place. Tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you draw the line, because by the time this story ends, you'll know exactly where I drew mine. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 45, a civil engineer who spends his days making sure bridges don't fail and his nights wishing people came with load ratings. I live in Renfield, a small Midwestern town that prides itself on clean sidewalks, polite fences, and a gossip network faster than the weather radio. My wife, ex-wife now, is Vanessa. Our daughter is June, 15, elbowy and earnest, a cellist with calloused fingertips and an old soul that somehow found its way into a teenager's body. The text that pulled me into the street came from an unknown number. 2 words. It's June. I dropped a grocery bag on the driveway and didn't notice the apples rolling under the SUV. By the time I reached the corner, Owen Price, the foundation darling with a watch that could pay a semester of college, was on my porch pressing a towel into my daughter's hairline while Vanessa cried into her hands and didn't touch either of them. "Ambulance is close," he said, as if I should thank him for accuracy. June's eyes found mine over the towel's edge and clung there. "Dad," she said, steady as a plumb line. I told him I didn't want to go. People will tell you the worst sounds are sirens or crying or bones breaking. They're wrong. The worst sound is a calm voice from a child explaining the adult's mistake. At the hospital, the doctor said minor concussion and 5 stitches. I nodded like a man who understands numbers. When the nurse asked how it happened, June glanced at me and then at the patterned curtain like privacy could be invented by staring hard enough. "He wanted to drive fast," she said. "He said I was safe." Owen kept his jaw set like a door he wouldn't open. Vanessa stood small in a corner of the room, eyes shiny, apology hovering on her lips like fog that never becomes rain. When we got home, June fell asleep on the couch with the TV murmuring about a low-pressure system. I stood in the kitchen with Vanessa and asked the questions I had carefully saved for after this project, after this week, after we're less tired. Why was our daughter in his car? Where were you when she called me from a stranger's phone? When did he become the adult she was supposed to trust? Her answers spilled like loose change, soft, scattered, rolling in the wrong direction. "It was casual," she said. "He offered to drop her at rehearsal. I didn't think—" "No," I said, and the word felt like a beam seating into place. "You didn't." I told Owen to leave. I told Vanessa to pack a bag and be out by morning. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I spoke like a man reading a blueprint. He drew himself. Calm can be the loudest rage in the room. Calm says, "The demolition has already started. I'm just telling you which walls are load-bearing. If you want the before, here it is." 6 months earlier, Owen Price walked into the school gym for the Arts Wing fundraiser with a blazer that understood lighting and a smile that had tried on every mirror in town. "I'm with the foundation," he said, shaking hands in a way that measured people for usefulness. Vanessa introduced us like she was introducing 2 parts of a life that hadn't learned to disagree yet. He laughed a beat late at jokes and spoke in sentences that sounded pre-approved. People like that are experts at borrowing your weather and making you think it's theirs. Back then, I was sleeping under headphones, drowning out flood barrier simulations and the melancholy scales of Bach drifting under June's bedroom door. "Marriage is a series of negotiated absences," an old professor once told me. "You leave, You return, you hope the bridge holds. Ours held until it didn't. The first crack? Small. Vanessa found a lipstick shade I hadn't seen since we were 25 and fearless. She lingered at committee meetings and came home perfumed with expensive wool and a citrus cologne that didn't live in our house. She said the foundation was generous, the town's kids deserved more, that this was a chance to be part of something. I nodded because men like me are trained to be reasonable first and honest second. June noticed quicker. Mom laughs different on Thursdays, she said, slicing an apple into exact halves with the seriousness of surgery. Like she's trying it on. I said grown-ups get tired and tired sounds weird. She chewed slowly, as if questions take time to soften. The night after the hospital, I made soup too salty and June ate it anyway. Vanessa texted from a friend's spare room near the foundation office. Long paragraphs about exhaustion, about being unseen, about how you don't get it, Ethan. I did not reply. Some silences are cowardice. Some are boundary. I chose the one that could hold weight. In the morning, I called a lawyer named Ruiz who likes me exactly as much as her retainer indicates. I changed locks and codes and expectations. I booked June with a therapist who plays cello on weekends and knows how to let a kid talk around the words she can't place yet. We're going to treat June's trust like scaffolding, the therapist said. Rebuild around it, not on it. People assume a father in my position burns the other man's life with gasoline and a match. I thought about it. There is a petty corner in the heart that writes its own screenplays, but revenge, wielded recklessly, can turn you into the person you're trying to defeat. I decided on something cleaner. I would make the truth so complete that lies had nowhere to sit. I would carry it into rooms where truth still matters more than charm. A week after the crash, I met with the superintendent. I brought the police incident number, the discharge notes, and the therapist's recommendation that June no longer be in the orbit of the man who prioritized thrill over safety. I didn't mention infidelity. We were not on that bridge. We were crossing the one labeled child safety and liability exposure, and administrators navigate that with both hands on the rail. Then I invited Mrs. Hart, the PTA president with a spine like a church bell, over for coffee. She believes in two things: kids and consequences. She asked 3 questions, took 4 notes, and said, "Thank you for trusting me," which is what people say when they have been waiting too long for adults to behave like adults. I also emailed the foundation board secretary, not the chair, the secretary. If you want to understand a machine, talk to the person who oils it. Could you send me your policy on volunteers transporting minors? I wrote. She replied with a PDF in 10 minutes. Section 7C. No volunteer may transport a minor without written parental consent on file. Any breach results in immediate suspension pending review. I sent her the date, time, and hospital code. She wrote back 1 sentence. Consider the review begun. Here's something else about men like Owen. When they build reputations on generosity, they build power on secrecy. Secrecy leaves ledgers. I didn't hack. I didn't hire a lockpick with an alias. I read public filings. I traced donations looped through shell charities with names that sounded like candles. I printed until my office smelled like hot paper. When I finished, I had a map of a different kind of speeding, money taking corners too fast in the rain. I did not take it to the police first. I called Vanessa. "Come by while June's at therapy," I said. "No shouting, just paper." We stood at the dining table where we once folded birthday napkins into triangles. I laid out dates and arrows and circular routes that always returned to Owen's name. "You're trying to hurt him," she said, but there was no string section under her accusation, just the dry whistle of wind. "I'm trying to protect our daughter," I said, "and anyone else's kid who might sit in his passenger seat when the forecast is bad." She left without the folder. Sometimes proof has to wait in the light until someone chooses to see it. 2 days later, the foundation asked Owen to step back pending review. The school sent a community email reminding everyone that private transportation of students requires consent on file. The town learned new phrases: interim compliance, conflict of interest, external audit. I went to work, made dinner, and listened to June play the third movement of the Bach suite with a carefulness that made me want to bubble wrap the world. On a warm Saturday, I took June to the river path with our neighbor's arthritic beagle tugging at the leash like memory dragging hope. "Do you hate Mom?" she asked, teen blunt, eyes on the water. "No," I said. "I hate choices that hurt you. I hate when grown-ups forget the rules are there to keep people safe, not bored." "She said she was lonely," June said, kicking a stone into the shallows. "I don't know what kind of lonely makes you forget your kid." "Some kinds," I said. "The kind that tell you applause is love. The kind that believes someone seeing you is the same as someone being there." We walked until the beagle declared a union break and flopped under a sycamore. I told June about load limits, about how every bridge has a number stamped into its bones. "Life works like that," I said. "We carry too much, we start to creak. Good people stop and unload. Bad people speed up." That evening, Vanessa knocked on the door. The citrus cologne ghost was gone. She smelled like rain and nerves. "I ended it," she said without preamble. "He said the board would protect him. He laughed when I told him June's scared of cars now." She swallowed like the air fought back. "I chose wrong." I let her talk. She told me charm arrives like a drip and accumulates into a tide. That being seen can feel like being loved when you're tired enough. She didn't ask for forgiveness, which is good, because it wasn't in my pocket. "That belongs to June," I said. "On a timeline, we won't rush." Vanessa nodded like someone who finally heard a sentence that didn't try to sell her anything. The foundation's secretary phoned 2 days later. "External auditor engaged," she said, crisp as a file label. 3 days after that, the local paper ran a column about best practices and clarified procedures. It named no names. Midwest newspapers prefer to thunder without pointing out the sky. Owen left me a voicemail that started with, "Listen, man," and ended with a promise I've already forgotten. I didn't call back. I do not debate with people who call rain bad luck when they were the ones who tore off the roof. Court came like winter, inevitable, dry-mouthed, fluorescent. We kept it narrow: custody, medical authority, non-transport clauses carved into stone. Vanessa agreed to terms before the judge had to tell her to. When she looked at June, she looked like someone who had learned how far a bridge can fall and was trying to rebuild with both hands. The order gave me primary custody and decision-making, gave Vanessa scheduled time we called open windows, and gave June permission not to be polite when she needed to be safe. If you're still with me, drop the word bridges in the comments so I know you crossed this span with me. And if this story has a hand on your shoulder, subscribe. You'll want to hear how the second half ends. After court, June and I made a life that didn't apologize for being simple. The cello moved to the back window where the light loves maple wood. I learned 1 decent pasta and 2 passable soups. On Wednesdays, we drove the long way home. She stuck her hand into the slipstream and let it carve the air. We talked about pop quizzes and gym class and the difference between sorry and change. One Sunday, Vanessa texted, "June asked if we could all have dinner together." My first answer lived in my ribs and spelled no. Then I looked at the faint scar in June's hairline that you'd miss if you didn't know to look. Some bridges exist for a single crossing, others for many. We met at a diner that promises nothing more than coffee and pie and keeps both promises. June chose the booth by the window. We talked about school and soup and a terrible TV show we all pretend to hate but keep watching anyway. No one said sorry. No one said never again. We let it be ordinary, which is sometimes the bravest thing a family can manage. It would be tidy to end here, but life dislikes tidy. The audit found irregularities, polite headline word, and Owen stepped down to pursue other opportunities, which did not arrive. He moved 2 towns over where doors didn't recognize his face. Vanessa started volunteering at the animal shelter where the dogs teach you everything you need to know about trust without saying a word. Months later, on a Wednesday of high, breathless blue, I watched June lift her bow and place it on the string like a promise. She began the prelude again, clean, unafraid, and I understood something the bridge textbooks never told me. Sometimes the structure doesn't fail. Sometimes the river rises and you raise the deck, and that is enough. And for anyone wondering whether I destroyed them, Vanessa and Owen, I didn't swing a hammer. I held up the plans. I pointed at the cracks. I insisted we stop pretending the creaking was a song. The fall took care of itself. Vanessa's request for that awkward family dinner had stirred something I wasn't ready to name. We'd sat there in that corner booth, our daughter between us, the air thick with unsaid things, yet somehow we'd managed not to topple any of the fragile bridges we'd rebuilt for June. But afterward, as I drove us home, I kept replaying the look in Vanessa's eyes when she glanced at me. Not quite regret, not quite apology, but a silent acknowledgement of the wreckage between us. I told myself it was just the strangeness of the 3 of us pretending the middle hadn't been burned away. But deep down, I knew it was the opening of a door I thought I'd locked for good. The days after that dinner stretched long and quiet. June buried herself in her routines, school, cello practice, walking the neighbor's beagle when they were away. I filled my days with client meetings, site inspections, and the kind of paperwork that can swallow hours whole. The house felt stable, like a bridge under light load. But at night, when the fridge hummed and the wind nudged at the eaves, I caught myself wondering if Owen was still circling. I had no proof, only the instinct that comes from having watched a man like him fall before. People like Owen don't fade into the background. They look for cracks to slip back through. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I decided I wasn't going to wait for him to reappear. I didn't need revenge for myself anymore, not in the old burning way. But I couldn't unsee that image of him leaning over June in the rain, blood soaking through a towel, while Vanessa stood frozen. That moment had carved itself into me like a permanent groove in steel. I wasn't going to let him find another foothold. Not in her life, not in mine, not in anyone's in Renfield. Before I could act, though, the past came for me. Not in a sharp, sudden way, but like the slow unfurling of an old photograph. I remembered a morning years ago, before the foundation galas and whispered committee meetings. We'd been in our first little house, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a kitchen so small we could touch opposite counters at the same time. Vanessa had been making pancakes, hair pulled up messily, a streak of flour across her cheek. June was barely 3, toddling between us with a wooden spoon. The air had smelled of butter and coffee, and for a moment the whole world had been contained within those walls. I'd thought then that I'd built something unshakable. That morning came back to me now like a cruel kind of proof. What you think will last forever can be dismantled in silence, piece by piece. Shaking the memory off, I started mapping my plan. If I wanted to make sure Owen stayed out, I needed to think like him, find the rooms he wanted to be in and lock every door. I began with the people who'd been in his orbit at the foundation. I called. I met for coffee. I lingered at the edges of town events where former board members still gathered. Most were polite but cautious, the kind of careful that says, "I know things, but I'm not sure I should tell you." A few, though, were eager to talk once they realized I wasn't after gossip. I was after patterns. The event coordinator remembered the way Owen worked the room for himself, not the cause. The volunteer treasurer spoke of last-minute redirected checks for emergencies no one could later verify. A music teacher told me about the time Owen offered a ride to a student without asking the parents. Details that seemed small in isolation, but together painted a picture I recognized all too well. I kept notes, meticulous ones, dates, names, incidents, dollar amounts. And as I compiled them, I thought about June. Not just the accident, but the way she'd quietly changed afterward. She still played her cello, but her sound had shifted, less effortless, more deliberate, as if she was measuring each note before letting it go. It made me want to put the whole world in bubble wrap, keep her safe from every sharp edge. Vanessa, meanwhile, had become different. Since cutting Owen out, she'd started volunteering at the animal shelter. June mentioned it one night over dinner, saying her mom seemed quieter, but in a good way. I noticed it too. She showed up to school events, she sent texts to check in, she even asked about my work. I didn't take it as an attempt to reconcile, but it was impossible not to see she was trying in her own way. That, oddly, made my job harder. It's easier to fight a villain than a flawed person who's learning. 2 weeks after the dinner, I got a call from Karen Holt, the interim director of the foundation. Her voice was measured, deliberate. She said she'd heard from the board secretary about my earlier concerns and wanted to clarify a few matters. Karen didn't waste words. She didn't pretend Owen was anything but a liability. She told me the board had voted to bar him permanently from any role in the foundation, paid or volunteer. We can't undo the past, she said, but we can make sure it doesn't repeat. I thanked her, but the closure I expected didn't come. It still felt like Owen was out there, circling. That night, June wandered into the kitchen as I made tea. "Dad," she said, "do you think people can really change?" It was the kind of question that lands like a stone in your chest. "Sometimes," I said, "but not if they think they don't need to." She nodded, picking at the hem of her sweatshirt. "Mom says she's trying." I believe her, I told her, and I meant it. Believing didn't erase the past, but it was something. I kept my ear to the ground. Renfield is a strange place for news. It can travel at lightning speed or barely move at all. I learned Owen had been spotted at a networking event in a nearby city, trying to wedge himself into another nonprofit. I also learned that at least 2 people there had already heard about the incident with June. That was enough for me. I gathered every statement, every document, every timeline, and sent them to the directors of every major nonprofit in the region. No accusations, just facts. I knew what would happen. Whispers, closed doors, polite refusals. And it worked. The sightings dwindled. Owen Price was becoming a man without a stage. Life took on a calmer rhythm. June's playing regained some of its old warmth. Vanessa and I spoke more often, not about us, but about logistics, school projects, the shelter dogs she worked with. It wasn't friendship, but it wasn't open war either. It was workable. Then, one rainy Thursday, I saw Owen again. I was walking out of the grocery store, and there he was, loading bags into the back of a faded sedan. He looked up, met my eyes, and for a moment, we both stood still. Then he gave me a small, bitter smile, like a man who's lost but refuses to concede, and drove off. I stood in the rain, jacket soaking through, wondering if that was the last time I'd see him, or just a pause before the next round. That night, June practiced in the living room while I watched from the kitchen doorway. Her bow moved with a steadiness that told me she was finding her way back. And I realized I might never know if Owen was truly gone, but maybe I didn't need to. Some battles aren't about victory. They're about ensuring the people you love never have to fight them at all. The next week brought an unexpected turn. Vanessa called, asking if I could meet her for coffee. I hesitated, but curiosity won. We met at a small cafe near the shelter. She looked tired, but not worn down, more like someone working hard at something that mattered. Over lattes, we didn't touch much. She told me she'd been going to counseling. Alone. She didn't ask for me to forgive her. She just wanted me to know she was trying to be better for June. I listened, offering no promises. Sometimes just being heard is the first step for someone. After that meeting, I found myself thinking less about Owen and more about what came next. For June, for Vanessa, for me. But fate, or whatever you want to call it, wasn't done with us. One afternoon, while I was reviewing blueprints at the shop, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. The message was short. You don't know the whole story. I stared at it for a long time. My gut told me it was connected to Owen. And if that was true, then the quiet I'd been building was about to be disturbed again. I didn't reply to the message right away. I stared at those 6 words until my coffee went cold, rolling them over in my mind like loose change. You don't know the whole story. The number was unfamiliar, but the tone was deliberate, almost taunting. Someone wanted me curious. Someone wanted me to follow. By evening, I'd convinced myself it could be a prank. Small towns have a way of feeding on leftover drama, and mine was still fresh enough for people to chew on. But when I checked the message again before bed, I noticed something. No request for money, no link, no threat. Just the statement, like a breadcrumb in the middle of a quiet road. The next morning, I called the number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. No name, just the automated voice asking me to leave a message. I didn't. Instead, I sent a text. Who is this? 10 minutes later, the reply came. Someone who knows what Owen did before he met Vanessa. That was enough to push me from curiosity into motion. If there was more to Owen's story, I wanted to know it. Not for Vanessa, not even for June, but for me. Because the thing about men like him is that they rarely start with the damage you see. There's always a prelude, smaller in scale but cut from the same cloth. The person on the other end agreed to meet me in person. A diner, 2 towns over, Saturday afternoon. They wouldn't give their name, only saying, "You'll know me when you see me." When I walked in, the smell of fried food and strong coffee wrapped around me like an old coat. In the corner booth sat a woman in her early 50s, hair pulled back tight, eyes scanning the room. She waved me over before I could speak. "You're Ethan," she said. "Sit down." Her name was Laura, and 10 years ago she'd been married to a man who'd worked alongside Owen at a charity in another state. According to her, Owen's charm had been just as polished then, but his real skill was in blurring lines between personal and professional, between generosity and self-interest. She told me about a fundraising trip where Owen had borrowed a donor's boat for an unsanctioned party, and about a teenage volunteer who'd suddenly quit after a late-night mentoring session that no one could fully explain. "They kept it quiet," Laura said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "Too many people owed him favors, but it's a pattern. He finds someone vulnerable, someone who wants to believe in him, and he makes himself indispensable until he doesn't need them anymore." I asked why she was telling me this now. She shrugged. "Because people like him don't stop unless someone makes them. And because I heard about your daughter." Driving home, I felt that old mix of rage and resolve hardening again. It wasn't enough to keep Owen out of Renfield. I needed to close every door he might try to open elsewhere. That night, I sat at my desk and started a new file. Owen's history, from Laura's stories to my own records, laid out in black and white. I pulled public records, archived news articles, anything with his name attached. The pattern was undeniable. A trail of short-lived positions, glowing introductions, and quiet departures. In the middle of this, June knocked on the door. "Dad, are you busy?" she asked, holding her cello case like it might slip from her hands. Never too busy, I said, closing the laptop. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking smaller than she had in months. Mom told me about some of the stuff Owen did. Not all of it, but enough. She cried. I searched her face, trying to read what she wasn't saying. How do you feel about that? June shrugged. I don't know. I hate him. But I don't know if I hate her. I put a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide that now. Some feelings take their time figuring out where they belong. The following week, I reached out to Karen Holt again. I told her what Laura had shared, offered to send documentation. She hesitated, then said, "Send it to me. Off the record. For now." I did. And a few days later, she called back, her voice tight. We've forwarded some of this to legal counsel. I can't promise action, but this could have consequences for him. Meanwhile, Vanessa kept her distance, but there were moments when our paths crossed, dropping June off, school events, the occasional phone call about scheduling. Each time there was a flicker in her eyes, like she wanted to say more. I didn't push. We were navigating something fragile, and I didn't want to force it. Then, out of nowhere, she called one evening and asked if she could come over. Just to talk, she said. I agreed, curious. She arrived with damp hair, no makeup, wearing the sweatshirt I remembered from years ago. She sat at the kitchen table and said, I heard you've been looking into Owen again. I told her the truth, that I'd met someone with information, that I was compiling it, that I intended to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I wish I'd known that man before everything. Maybe I would have seen him for what he is. Maybe, I said. Or maybe he would have found a way to make you believe him anyway. That's what people like him do. We didn't solve anything that night, but as she left, she paused in the doorway and said, For what it's worth, I'm glad you're the one who's her father. The investigation took on a life of its own after that. Laura connected me with 2 more people from Owen's past, each with their own story, each one echoing the same pattern. I organized the accounts into a timeline, sent them to a journalist I trusted in the city. I didn't expect them to run it immediately. Stories like this take time, corroboration, layers of verification. But planting the seed was enough. One Friday afternoon, I got another message from the unknown number. This time it said, check your email. There in my inbox was a scanned letter, Owen's resignation from a youth mentorship program 5 years ago. The letter was polite, professional, but the timing matched a police report about an unsubstantiated incident involving a minor. The dots weren't hard to connect. I sent it to Karen, to the journalist, to anyone who had a reason to keep an eye on Owen. And then I sat back, feeling the shift. It wasn't over, but the walls around him were getting higher. At the same time, June's music was changing again. Not back to what it was before, but into something new, stronger, more deliberate. One night after practice, she said, I don't think about that day as much anymore. I told her that was a good thing. She smiled, a real one, and for the first time in months, I believed we were moving forward. Still, the story from that letter haunted me. The idea that Owen had been this way for years, maybe decades, and had simply slipped from one town to another, leaving just enough behind to stain the ground but not enough to stop him. It lit a fire under me. That fire would lead me somewhere I didn't expect. I drove to the river and sat in the truck with the engine off until the windshield fogged. The letter wouldn't leave me alone. It pulsed behind my eyes like a warning light on a dashboard. If Owen had been forced out before for unsubstantiated reasons, this wasn't a one-time lapse. It was a pattern with a careful wardrobe. And patterns don't stop because you ask nicely. Saturday morning, Laura texted another name and a place. A playground 2 counties over, late afternoon. I found the bench by the swings and a man in a city maintenance jacket already waiting there. He introduced himself as Dante. His son had been in a youth program 5 years back. Owen had been a mentor. Nothing criminal had ever stuck. Too many friendly letters, too much benefit of the doubt, too many adults who preferred to keep the brochure shiny. But Dante told me about language that blurred into pressure, about boundaries that were treated like suggestions, about a night when his son came home quiet and wouldn't let him wash the shirt that smelled like a stranger's cologne. "Look," Dante said, staring out at the empty slides, "I can't prove what didn't have witnesses. But I can tell you this. When I heard your daughter got hurt, I didn't sleep for 2 days. Some men make their own weather. He brings storms and calls them summer." I thanked him, took notes, promised to pass nothing along without his permission. He shook my hand like a father shakes another father's hand when there are no good words left. On the drive home, the world looked too clean. Trees lined up politely, the sky rinsed and generous, kids on bikes ringing bells that sounded like something you heard in a different life. I pulled over and sat there until my heartbeat matched the metronome of the turn signal. Then I called Karen Holt and said, "I have more." She told me to come by the foundation office on Monday, off the record again, because institutions like to control the temperature of their rooms even when the house is on fire. That night, June practiced late. The low notes traveled through the floorboards like a kind of prayer. I sat on the top step and listened, thinking about bridges, the way they don't shout when they're overloaded. They whisper. They tell anyone who cares enough to listen exactly where it hurts. Sunday morning, the unknown number rattled my phone again. "Check your mail," it read. Not email, mail. I went out to the curb and thumbed through circulars, envelopes with my name in efficient fonts, a package that felt like a book. Inside was a thin folder and a single sheet of paper on top. Transportation consent. Minor participant. There was a name line for the volunteer driver, a name line for the student, the date, the event, and at the bottom, a parent's signature, Vanessa's signature. My throat went tight. I told myself I was misreading it. I told myself the looping V could belong to 100 people. But I'd seen that signature on mortgage papers and school forms and the back of love notes that had lived in a shoebox for years. It looked like hers. It sat there on my kitchen table like a trap snapping shut. I called Karen. She picked up on the second ring. "We received a copy as well," she said quickly. "It was scanned to an old admin email this morning. We're trying to determine the source." "Where did this come from?" I asked, more to the air than to her. "We never signed anything like this. We would never—" "I can't speak to that yet," she said carefully. "But our interim counsel says the form is odd. It doesn't match the format we've used the past 2 years. We're verifying whether it's legitimate." After we hung up, I stared at the signature until the lines blurred. Rage has a way of making the room small. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the baseboard heat click, the faint buzz of an insect trying to escape a windowsill. I called Vanessa. "I need you to come over," I said. "Now." She arrived in 10 minutes. No perfume, no armor. She walked to the table, looked down at the paper, and the blood left her face so quickly I thought she might faint. "That's my name," she whispered. "But I didn't sign that." "Are you sure?" The question felt dirty in my mouth the moment I asked it. "Vanessa, are you absolutely sure?" She lifted her eyes slowly, and for once there was nothing defensive there, no fog of justification. "Ethan," she said evenly, "I did not sign that form." We stood like that for a long moment, the house small around us, the paper between us like a blade. June wasn't home. She was at a lesson, and I was grateful because whatever was about to happen wasn't for her. "Think," I said, forcing my voice into something that didn't shake. "Did you sign anything that week? A stack of papers? A general permission form? Did he—" She cut me off with a small, strangled sound. "He brought a folder to my office," she said slowly, as if the words had to be pulled up from a well. "He said it was volunteer insurance updates. I initialed some pages. I didn't read them all. I know how that sounds, Ethan. I know." "Did you sign a transport consent?" "I don't know. I don't think so. It didn't look like this." She tapped the paper lightly with 2 fingers, as if it could bite. "The font's wrong. The letterhead. We changed that logo last year. This looks like the old one." I took a photo and texted it to Karen. She replied within minutes. "We're checking versions now. Please don't share publicly yet." "I need to know where this came from," I said. "Who mailed it? Why today?" Vanessa put a hand to her mouth and shook her head. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. "Maybe he thinks I'll lie for him." We stared at each other over the table. It was like watching a bridge we didn't know we were standing on start to sway. I spent the afternoon tearing through old files. I found a binder from a year and a half ago labeled PTA Forms. Inside, templates, sign-in sheets, a draft consent release with comments in Vanessa's handwriting that said things like, "Tighten clause," and "too vague here." No transportation consent. No signature. My phone rang at dusk. Karen again, voice tighter. "The form you received uses a letterhead from 3 years ago, a footer from 18 months ago, and the field labels we introduced last quarter. It's a Frankenstein. If your ex-wife didn't sign and we have no record of that form, someone constructed this after the fact." "Someone like Owen," I said. "I can't name anyone," she replied, "but we will be turning this over to counsel and the auditor." After the call, the house felt unsafe. Not because anyone was inside it, but because a lie had made it in through the mail slot and sat like a guest at our table. My phone buzzed with a new message from the unknown number. "Do the loops on her V tilt left or right? Ask your daughter." I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I typed, "Who are you?" The dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. June came home humming under her breath and dropped her backpack by the door. She held up a sheet of music like a small victory. "Mrs. Lane says my staccato's finally listening." She started toward the kitchen and stopped when she saw the paper on the table. "What's that?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I said quickly. Too quickly. She looked from me to Vanessa, who was still standing, arms folded like she was holding herself together. "It's grown-up paperwork," Vanessa said, which in our house had become code for things that used to be invisible. June walked to the table anyway and bent over the signature. "That's Mom's name," she said. No fear in it, just observation. "But the J curl on her Vanessa always loops over the N. This one doesn't." We stared at her. She shrugged lightly. "You taught me to notice bridges. I notice handwriting too." Vanessa squeezed her eyes shut and let out a slow breath, then crossed to June and pulled her into a hug that looked like apology and relief in the same motion. I turned the paper face down. That night, I barely slept. Every time I drifted, I dreamed of signatures that moved when I tried to read them, of roads that bent where maps said they didn't. At 3 a.m., I got up and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything we knew. The accident, the policy, the alleged consent, the mismatched letterhead, the loop on the V. I drew arrows like I was diagramming a load path. At the bottom, I wrote what June had said. Some battles aren't about victory. I underlined it and watched the ink sink in. In the morning, I called a friend from college who'd ended up a quiet genius at digital forensics. He owed me a favor from a lifetime ago when his car died on a bridge I'd designed, and I got him towed before the news crew arrived. "Send me a high-res scan," he said. "If this is a composite, we'll know." A scan went out before 8. By noon, he called back. "It's layered," he said without preamble. "There are micro-alignments that don't match." The signature is an overlay from another document. Whoever did this tried to rasterize the final, but they missed a halo around the descenders. It's a cut-and-paste job. Clean, but not perfect. Can you tell where the signature came from? Maybe, he said. If you can get me 5 or 6 known samples from similar time frames, I can make a match probability. But Ethan, this is forgery. Not in the artistic sense, in the criminal one. I hung up and called Karen again. She asked me to forward the analysis to counsel. We're escalating, she said, then added softly, I'm sorry. By late afternoon, the journalist I'd sent the timeline to pinged me. She had questions about dates, names, the original police report. She'd heard rumblings from other organizations that Owen had been applying around. We don't rush this, she said, but when a forgery appears, that suggests consciousness of guilt. At 5, as I was chopping onions for dinner, headlights washed across the living room ceiling and settled. A knock followed. I opened the door to find Owen on my porch in a collared shirt that looked ironed and a smile that looked broken. We need to talk, he said. No, I said, and started to close the door. He slid his shoe forward, not enough to jam it, just enough to be a nuisance. I'm leaving town, he said quickly. I wanted to say goodbye, and I wanted to tell you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. What part? I asked. The driving fast with a kid in the car in the rain, the lying to a board, the paper you built from spare parts? His face flickered. For a second, a crack. Then the old smoothness returned. She signed it. Maybe she doesn't remember. It was a busy time. She was overwhelmed. Behind me, June's bow paused on a string, a breath held. Vanessa stepped into the hall, quiet. She didn't sign, I said, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. We stood on the porch like 2 men waiting for weather. And we can prove it. He studied my face. You think you're the hero, he said finally, not angry, just tired. But you're just the loudest person in the room right now. Rooms change. Sometimes they lock, I said. A car turned onto our street. He glanced past me, then back. Tell Vanessa I wish her well, he said. And it was the first sentence I'd ever heard from him that sounded remotely human. He walked down the steps without waiting for an answer and got into a different car than the one I'd seen at the store. He drove away slow, as if speed had finally taught him something. I went back inside. June had set the bow down. Vanessa folded her arms again, then dropped them. I'm sorry, she said, but it wasn't the word she'd used before, the one that slid off the surface and never got in. This one arrived, took off its coat, and sat. We're going to finish this, I said. Carefully. The next 48 hours moved like a slow storm. My friend sent a more detailed analysis. Karen's counsel looped in an outside firm. The journalist asked for confirmation on 2 names and 1 date. Dante texted to say he was willing to speak on background if it helped keep other kids safe. Laura emailed a photo of a donor boat, the one from the unsanctioned party, its name in the corner of another charity's newsletter like a ghost. Then came the call from the district attorney's office. A woman with a voice that could cut rope said, Mr. Cole, we're opening an inquiry. We'd like to collect the document you received and speak with you and Ms. Cole about chain of custody. Would you be available tomorrow morning? After I agreed and gave times, she added, I don't promise outcomes. I promise process. But forgery tied to a safety incident is not something we ignore. When I hung up, the quiet in the house felt different. Not the brittle quiet of fear, but the measured quiet of a room where work is about to begin. Is it over? June asked from the doorway, arms wrapped around her middle like she was holding herself together and didn't want me to notice. Almost, I said. Maybe not the way stories end on TV. but enough to sleep. She nodded and walked past me to the music stand. "Ms. Lane says beginnings are easy," she said, tightening the bow hair. "It's the middles that get messy." "She's right," I said. That night, I dreamed of the bridge outside town. In the dream, the river rose, and I was underneath with a wrench, adjusting a bolt by feel. Above me, people crossed without looking down. One of them was June, her cello case on her back like a shell. One of them was Vanessa, walking carefully, eyes on her kid. One of them was a man I didn't want to see, but did anyway. I didn't collapse the structure. I didn't build a new one. I raised the deck. Morning arrived crisp and honest. We drove to the DA's office with a folder on the seat between me and Vanessa like a small, intense passenger. June went to school. On the way, Vanessa said, "When this is over, I'd like to talk to you about something else." She didn't say what. I didn't ask. Some conversations have to wait until the air is clear. The assistant DA met us in a room that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. She took our statements, photographed the envelope, the paper, the signature. She asked about timing, about the unknown number, about the foundation's policies. She asked Vanessa to write her name 10 times on a legal pad, then made copies. "We'll be in touch," she said. Again, no promises. But this is not nothing. Back in the parking lot, my phone vibrated. A new message from the unknown number. He's not the only one who knows how to cut and paste. The next text followed before I could respond. A photo attachment loading slowly in the morning sun. When it sharpened, I saw the original of Vanessa's signature on a PTA memo from last year, cropped, the bottom edge crimped where a paperclip had once been. The caption, "He learned from the best." The best in this case being a town that looks away when the form is close enough. For a second I felt the ground tilt. Not because it absolved him, nothing would, or because it implicated us. Because it reminded me how ordinary the beginnings of a forgery can be. A shortcut, a busy day, a shrug, a trust misused. I typed, "Who are you? Why help now?" 3 dots pulsed, stopped, pulsed again. The reply, "Because I didn't help then." "Who is it?" Vanessa asked, shading her eyes against the sun. "I don't know," I said. "But they just told me why people like him last as long as they do." On the drive home, we passed the river. The water was high but not dangerous. Men in waders stood still as fence posts, casting lines that glinted when the light found them. I wanted to stop and watch, to learn how you hold still and move at the same time. Instead, I kept driving, and the car hummed, and a sense of something like conclusion gathered but didn't land. At home, June's cello stood by the window, catching the late morning. I touched the case lightly as I walked past, like knocking on wood. My phone buzzed once more. The journalist. "We're going to publish. Not a trial, not a verdict, a pattern. Are you ready for your quote?" I looked at Vanessa, who was staring at the scar in the oak table where a hot pot had branded us into permanence years ago. I thought of Dante's son, of Laura's husband, of the anonymous texter who was trying to patch a hole in their own story by stitching ours. My thumbs hovered over the screen. Then I wrote, "We tell the truth, so kids don't have to carry it alone." I hit send. The message left with a soft whoosh. Across town, somewhere I couldn't see, a press of keys began. Across a room I could see, my ex-wife closed her eyes and breathed like she was learning how again. And in the doorway, my daughter practiced a run she hadn't mastered yet, the notes climbing, faltering, then finding their way forward. The article went live at 6:02 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour when the town is all coffee and quiet and the first school buses yawn awake. The headline didn't use his name in the line you could see without clicking, but the second line did, And the third line stacked dates like bricks. They didn't say predator. They didn't have to. They said pattern. And in Renfield, that lands harder than any accusation people can shrug off. By 6:07 a.m., my phone started vibrating in short bursts. A text from Laura. "It's out." Another from Dante. "I'll talk if they need me." And then a brief one from the unknown number. "Doors closing." Karen emailed at 6:19 with a copy of the Foundation's official statement, the kind that sounds like it was written with oven mitts on. We were cooperating. We valued safety. We were grateful for community input. We were engaging independent counsel. In the last paragraph, they named a new policy: permanent ineligibility for any volunteer or staff previously suspended for boundary violations. It was careful. It was late, and it was something. June padded into the kitchen at 6:31 in a sweatshirt 3 sizes too big, hair in a knot that said she hadn't slept well. "You look like you're waiting for a tornado," she said, pouring cereal without looking. I held up my phone. "It's live." She nodded, spoon hovering. "Do we read it?" she asked. "We don't have to," I said, which was true and also a lie because parts of it were for me to read and not for her. "I've read enough," she decided, and put the phone face down on the table like it was a decision she'd made about her own morning. At 7:12, Vanessa texted, "I'm here if June wants me today." I wrote back, "She has orchestra after school. I'll let you know." I didn't say what the article said. She already knew. By 7:45, the group chat for parents at June's school was a thicket of half-sentences and caution. By 8:03, the district sent a message that sounded like a hand on a shoulder. "Our children are safe today. We're reviewing procedures. Please talk to your kids." I dropped June off early so she could practice a passage she'd been wrestling with. 32 controlled staccatos that sounded like rain on a tin roof when she got them right. She slung the case onto her back and hugged me an extra second before she went. "See you at 3, she said, and in that moment I loved exactly how ordinary that sounded. On the way to work, the river glinted in strips through the trees like someone had threaded light into it. The article's details rearranged themselves in my head. The dates, the politely worded exits, the letter with the resignation, the unsubstantiated report that was never truly unsubstantiated so much as unchaste. I felt angry in a tired way, like a man who has lifted the same weight too many times and knows he'll lift it again. When I pulled into my office lot, my phone rang with a number from the DA's office. The assistant DA's voice was wired and focused. "We've issued a preservation request to the Foundation for all internal emails regarding transportation permissions and volunteer compliance for the past 3 years, she said. "We'll also want a sworn statement from Ms. Cole regarding the signature comparison." She paused, and in the pause I heard paper move. "Mr. Cole, we won't promise charges until we have what we need, but this isn't going away." "Good," I said, and it felt like a useful word. By mid-morning, the article had metastasized into conversation. My foreman, Luis, set a mug of coffee on my desk and said nothing, which is the best kind of solidarity. An engineer I'd known since my first job emailed to say, "You did the right thing," which is the kind of sentence people use when they wish they'd done something in their own town years ago. At 11, Karen called again. "We've retained a firm to audit all volunteer records, including past consent forms," she said. "We will be reaching out to parents. Would you prefer we use email or certified mail for your home?" "Use both," I said. "Use all of it." At noon, the unknown number finally called instead of texting. I stepped outside to take it, into a wind that smelled like coming rain. The voice was low and even, careful like someone who knows which words are edges. "I'm the one who sent the envelope," the caller said. "I used to work 3 desks down from the old admin inbox. I saw too much. I ignored more. I'm not ignoring this." "Who are you?" I asked. "A mistake," they said softly. "One I'm trying to correct." "Your name." A pause and a decision. Mara, the voice said. I kept the temp log in after they forgot to disable it. I pulled the consent template off the archive. I'm the one who stitched the old letterhead to the new footer last year when they rushed a donor packet and told me, close enough. I didn't forge the signature on what I sent you, but I recognized the hand that built the frame. You realize you've just admitted to a lot, I said. Not to you, Mara replied, a wan smile in the voice. To the DA if they ask. I've copied counsel on an affidavit. I'm done being the person who tapes over cracks and calls it paint. I leaned against the brick and watched a leaf spin down like a slow coin. Why now? I asked, because it was the only question left that mattered. She exhaled. Because your kid got blood on a towel, Mr. Cole. Because that could have been my niece. Because if the people who know the forms and the fonts and the footers won't talk, the story always ends with the headline unsubstantiated. I'm substantiating. I thanked her. It felt insufficient. But gratitude is a bridge too, and you walk the one available. In the afternoon, the journalist published a second piece, shorter, delicately fierce. The foundation confirming an internal audit. The district confirming new transportation trainings, parents like Dante quoted without names. The phrase, document irregularities, placed exactly where it would be read twice. The comments filled with the two kinds of strangers the internet breeds. Those who tell you what you lived, and those who tell you you're lying. I didn't read past the line where my quote sat like a nail. We tell the truth so kids don't have to carry it alone. At 3, I idled in the car line and watched June emerge from the side door with her cello on her back, head high. She slid into the passenger seat and buckled in. Ms. Lane says I can play second chair next month if I keep my wrist relaxed, she said, as if that were the only headline of the day. I looked at her and let the ordinary win. Second chair is just first chair's favorite, I told her, and she rolled her eyes in a way that meant she liked the joke. On the drive home, she asked, "Did he see it? The article?" "I'm sure," I said. "People always read the stories with their names in them." She nodded, watched the elm branches flicker. "Do you think he understands?" "What?" "What he did," she said. "I don't mean the rules. I mean, me, us." "I don't know," I said. "Some people learn when the room goes quiet. Some people only learn when the door locks." She thought about that. "I like quiet better," she decided, which is exactly who she is. Vanessa came by at 6 with takeout from a place none of us went to during the worst of it, like we were allowed to reclaim a menu. We ate at the table with the scar in the wood. She asked June about arpeggios and gym class and whether the beagle had finally stopped pretending to limp for extra treats. We talked about the article without talking about it, about the weather pattern it had made, not the storm itself. After dinner, June practiced the passage that used to trip her. When she got it, she looked up at both of us by habit, and for a fraction of a second the room returned to a version of itself that didn't hurt. After June went to shower, Vanessa stood by the sink and rinsed our bowls like a person rehearsing a conversation. "You told them the truth," she said finally. "Even the parts that make me look small." "I told them what happened," I said. "Small and big." She nodded. "I've been telling the truth too, in my therapy, to myself. It doesn't feel heroic," she added, a weary smile. "It feels like sweeping after a parade you shouldn't have thrown." "Keep sweeping," I said, and it wasn't judgment. It was permission. On Thursday, we sat in 2 different rooms with 2 different investigators answering the same questions about a signature loop and a consent form that wasn't. It was clinical and exhausting, an autopsy performed on paper. On Friday, the district sent out a new consent system that couldn't be printed or passed in hallways, the kind that requires 2 logins and a timestamp you can't fake. Parents grumbled. No one complained. Saturday morning, I took June to the Riverwalk because the air was the kind of bright you don't waste. The Beagle came along, gamely faking a limp for the first quarter mile before forgetting and trotting. Near the old footbridge, a couple I didn't know slowed as they passed. The woman said, "We read it, thank you." The man said nothing, but he touched the brim of his cap like men do when they were raised to say hello to bridges and good fences. We sat on a bench and watched the current scissor the light. "Do you think he'll leave?" June asked. "Probably," I said. "People move when the ground stops applauding." "What if he doesn't?" "Then we'll live anyway," I said, and she leaned on my shoulder, which is the truest thing we did all day. That afternoon, the DA's office asked for another meeting. This one included Mara, who arrived in a cardigan and determination. She looked younger than her voice and older than her regret. She handed over a thumb drive like it was heavier than it should have been. "This has internal draft forms, metadata, version histories," she said, not looking at me or Vanessa, looking at the assistant DA's pen. "It shows who edited what and when." The assistant DA clicked her pen shut. "Thank you," she said. "Whatever happens next, this matters." "What happens next?" Mara asked, not as a challenge, but as a person would ask a doctor who'd just named a tumor. "We build a case that could survive in front of a judge," the assistant DA said. "We don't build a headline." On Sunday, I took the long way home from the hardware store and drove past the small rental where I'd been told Owen was staying. The front curtains were open. A plant sat on the sill, ambitious for the light it had been given. The driveway was empty. I didn't stop. I didn't need to be a witness to absence. Monday morning, the foundation board announced a special meeting open to stakeholders, which is code for public, but with microphones. I went. So did a lot of other people. Some I recognized from PTA bake sales, and some I recognized from the signatures on the backs of checks. Karen ran it like a conductor who knows exactly when to bring in the low brass. She presented policy changes, audit updates, a timeline that didn't hide the parts where they had been slow. She said the word sorry once, in a sentence that made room for it to be heard. During the QA, a man in an expensive shirt said, "We can't punish someone for rumors." And a woman with a voice like Mrs. Hart's church bell said, "We're not punishing. We're preventing." A teacher from June's school stood and said, "Boundaries are not the enemy of generosity." The room hummed with a feeling I recognized, a structure flexing and not failing. After the meeting, Karen crossed to me. "There will be people who say we overreached," she said quietly. "There will be people who say we didn't go far enough. I can live between those." "So can bridges," I said, and she smiled like she needed the analogy. That evening, I found June in the yard teaching the Beagle to pretend to limp on the other side for comedic balance. She laughed in a way that had nothing to do with news cycles. Vanessa texted to say the shelter had adopted out a bonded pair that had been overlooked for months, and I let myself be happy about dogs I'd never meet. 3 days later, a deputy served Owen with a notice to appear for an interview regarding document fraud. He didn't show. A bench warrant followed quietly. He didn't get arrested in a blaze of light. It wasn't TV. But the next time he was pulled over for rolling a stop sign 2 towns over, the computer made a small, miraculous noise, and the quiet next step happened. They booked him. They let him post bond. They set a date. Process, not spectacle. The night after the arrest, the unknown number texted one last time. No heroes, just people who didn't look away. I wrote back, "Don't look away again." The read receipt popped up. No reply came. I didn't need one. Weeks stretched. The river dropped back into its bed. June auditioned for winter concert and got second chair and said it was perfect because she liked hearing the melody from nearby without carrying it alone. Vanessa kept showing up and not promising things she couldn't deliver. The DA's office called, and we practiced telling the truth in the order the court prefers to hear it. The day before the hearing, I drove June to school early, and we sat in the parking lot with the heater ticking. "Whatever happens," she said, "I don't want to be the kid this happened to forever." "You're not," I said. "You're the kid who kept playing." She smiled, small and bright. "You're the dad who raised the deck," she said. And I laughed because I didn't know she'd been listening that closely to the parts I only said in my head. At the hearing, the room felt like an empty stomach, hollow, waiting. Owen looked smaller than I remembered, which is what happens to men who run on applause when the acoustics change. His lawyer said words like misunderstanding and clerical. The assistant DA clicked her pen and said words like intent and alteration and chain of custody. Mara testified, hands steady, voice steadier. Vanessa wrote her name 10 times the way she had in the DA's office, the loops on the V tilting right the way they always did, the way a hand knows its own history. I answered questions like a person who designs things you can drive a truck across, plainly, with the math showing. The judge didn't decide that day. Judges like days. They like reading in quiet rooms without the itchy eyes of a town on them. He said he would issue a decision in writing. We walked out into a sky that had the particular blue of a second chance. On the courthouse steps, Dante clapped me on the shoulder once and went down without ceremony. Laura hugged me with the quick squeeze of someone who already had a bus to catch. Karen nodded from a distance. The board had likely told her to speak sparingly. Mara stood alone near a pillar and looked at the horizon like it owed her nothing and was giving her something anyway. Vanessa stood next to me with her arms at her sides, not folded, which I took as a sign. "What now?" she asked. "Now we go home," I said. "We make dinner. We ask June about gym class." It rained that night, the kind of steady rain that makes the house sound pleased with itself. June practiced, then stopped and asked if we could play a game we used to play when she was small. 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can touch that makes you feel safe. She went first. "Rain, the fridge, Mom humming under her breath," she said, and Vanessa startled a little, unaware she'd been making music with her mouth. "Tomato sauce, the laundry soap," June continued. "And this." She reached for my sleeve and pinched the flannel between her fingers. "This is safe." Later, after dishes and homework and the small domestic rituals that are a liturgy in a house that has survived a storm, I stood at the back window and watched the streetlights turn the rain into threads of gold. I thought about every small decision that had added up to this. The coffee with Mrs. Hart, the email to a secretary, the anonymous envelope, the text from a stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore. I thought about the way bridges don't brag when they hold, they just do it. My phone buzzed with an email I didn't expect, the judge's order, faster than anyone had predicted. The subject line was the case number. The attachment was a PDF that would be quoted on message boards by people who weren't there. In measured language, he denied the motion to dismiss, found probable cause on the forgery count, and referred questions of organizational negligence to the State Charity Bureau. At the bottom, he wrote 1 sentence without legalese. "Processes exist because people are fallible. When people exploit processes to hide that fact, the law will supply the spine." I closed the phone and stood very still, listening to the rain, the fridge, the almost hum of a house finding its heartbeat again. Vanessa came to stand beside me. We didn't speak for a while. When we did, it was simple. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For telling the truth," she said, "even when it caught me in it." "Truth is a net," I said. "If we're lucky, it keeps us from falling too far." She nodded. "And if we're unluckier than that?" "Then we raise the deck," I said, and she smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was ours. Sometime after midnight, June's door clicked open the way it used to when she wanted us to know she was awake. She padded into the hallway and leaned against the frame. "Can we have pancakes in the morning?" she asked, and the question was so ordinary and so precise in its nostalgia that it knocked me back a step. "Yes," I said, "with too much cinnamon." She grinned and disappeared, the house absorbing her footsteps like a body that has healed around an old, honest scar. The next morning, I whisked batter in a bowl that should have been replaced years ago. Vanessa poured coffee. June set the table, placing the forks with the same concentration she gives to a difficult bar. As the first pancake bubbled, the day bloomed. We ate. We didn't make toasts. We didn't say, "closure." We let the morning be made of small, good things. On my way to work, I took the long curve by the river. The water was level and the bridge was quiet, holding like it always had when no one was looking. Down, somewhere 2 towns over, a man who needed applause to feel like air was learning what rooms sound like without it. Somewhere in our town, a secretary kept a better archive. A board wrote policies that fit the hands that had to carry them. A teacher reminded a line of kids to hold the rail when they crossed. And somewhere at home, a girl tuned her cello. She drew the bow across the string and filled the room with the kind of sound that is not a triumph and not a lament, only a clear, steady note that knows exactly what it is and where it belongs. The town did what towns do best. It folded the loudest day into a quieter week, then placed that week into a drawer labeled "The Time We Learned." The headlines thinned. The group chats found new subjects. The river went on being a river. And in the hush that followed, I learned the difference between winning and healing. Some mornings I woke before the alarm to the old reflex. Reach for my phone, scan for fires, plan for battles. Each time I did, the screen showed ordinary things. A reminder for a site walk, a message from Luis about a delivery, a notification that June's orchestra moved rehearsal to Thursday. I started setting the phone face down and listening instead, counting the sounds that meant our life was intact. Rain in the gutters, the heater clicking on. June's bow testing a string in the other room, the tiny inhale she takes right before the first note. Vanessa and I kept our conversations practical on purpose. Logistics first, then little things that wouldn't look like much in a transcript. She'd send a photo of a dog from the shelter wearing a bandana. I'd reply with a picture of the beagle refusing to acknowledge his own tail. Now and then she'd drift toward the deep water. "I met with my counselor today," or "I told the group about the day with the sirens," and I'd learn how to answer without stepping on the wire. "I'm glad," I'd say. "I hear you. It is a strange mercy, realizing you can be decent with someone you can't be married to." June asked fewer questions about Owen and more about the future. Could she try for first chair in spring if she wanted to? Yes, but only if she wanted to, not because the world had made her feel behind. Could she join the student tech team and learn microphones and lights? Yes. Every stage needs more people who understand what makes sound clear. Could she one day forgive her mother for forgetting the rules that day? I told her forgiveness is a door with a dimmer switch, not a key. Sometimes you turn it by degrees and realize you've lit more of the room than you thought. The day the foundation posted the final audit summary, I read it on my lunch break in the truck. It was written like every report I've ever seen. The findings a series of sober paragraphs, the recommendations stacked like the rungs of a ladder. There were no names, but I recognized the shapes inside the sentences. A staff culture that rewarded speed over clarity, a habit of close enough in documentation, an over-reliance on one charismatic volunteer. They outlined trainings, controls, double signatures, time-stamped consent with alerts that ping 2 adults at once. It was dull in the right places. Dull is safe when it comes to permission and children. I forwarded it to Vanessa without commentary. She replied, "I read it twice." Then, "Thank you for making them look." I typed and erased 3 different answers before sending the only one that felt true. "We both made them look," I wrote. "Different ways, same direction." That weekend, June had her winter concert. The auditorium smelled like varnish and wool coats and the hopeful nerves of 100 families. Parents clustered in the aisles, doing the math of seating and sight lines. On stage, the orchestra tuned, a thin silver forest of sound becoming a single tree. Mrs. Porcelain stepped to the podium and lifted her hands. The first piece was Bach, a suite that knew how to walk and bow at the same time. "Second chair is just first chair's favorite," I'd told June, and when the melody passed down the row, she caught it like a relay baton and carried it cleanly for the length of her measure. I didn't record the moment. I breathed it in. After the show, I held her case while she hugged classmates and stashed rosin and found her scarf. Vanessa joined us, cheeks pink from clapping. "You were steady," she told June. "You were kind to the rests." June laughed. "Miss Lane says the rests are where the music breathes." Then she surprised me by tucking her hand into Vanessa's elbow, an old instinct finding a new home. It lasted only a second, but it landed. On Monday, the DA's office called to say the case would proceed on the forgery count, with plea talks likely. "No jail," the assistant DA said, and I could tell she hated saying it. But a conviction is not nothing. I thanked her, because gratitude remains a useful tool, and hung up with the clean acceptance of a man who designs for the loads the world actually asks you to carry, not the ones you dream it will. There were loose ends. There always are. A neighbor who'd sided quietly with Owen for months posted a long social update about waiting for facts, which is what people say when the facts refuse to arrive wearing the suit they ordered. A board member resigned and framed it as a sabbatical. An email list forwarded the audit with italics around the parts that sounded like absolution and skipped the parts that read like warning labels. You can't engineer a town into consensus. You can only keep the spans that matter sound. And then there was the text from a number I didn't recognize. He moved. It was blunt and small and everything. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to know which zip code would learn a new vocabulary word for boundary. I replied with one word, noted. Then I deleted the thread and put the phone face down again. One evening in late winter, I took June to see the bridge outside town at dusk. Snow fretted the railings, the river a dark ribbon with ice like lace along the edges. We parked and walked to the midpoint, our breath visible, our boots loud. "You built this one," she said, running a gloved hand along the cold metal. Drew it, checked it, argued for the budget, fixed the deck when the lumber delivery was late. That counts. "What do you think of it?" I asked. She leaned over and looked down where the water held the sky's last color. "I like that it's boring," she said. "It just does what it's supposed to." "Most good work is like that," I said. She was quiet, then asked the question that had been circling us for weeks. "Do you think Mom and you will ever be, okay?" "We're already okay," I said. "Just not the old kind." "What kind then?" "The kind where we're both trying to be the best parent in the room when you're there. The kind where she gets to fix what she broke and I don't make breaking the only thing she ever did." June nodded, her face turned toward the kind of light that doesn't warm you but lets you see. "I can live with that," she said. Spring didn't arrive. It accumulated. Patches of grass showed through the snow like a memory surfacing. The beagle rediscovered his joy in pretending to limp for sympathy and then sprinting to give it back. Vanessa and I fell into a habit of small exchanges that looked ordinary from far away and felt like progress up close. She asked for recipes. I asked for the name of the good groomer at the shelter. She left a stack of bowls in my sink one night and texted the next morning, "I'll bring new sponges." and I laughed out loud at how the world insists on being both less and more profound than your heart expects. On a Saturday with sky like tactful porcelain, I found myself at the high school gym for a fundraiser. Not for the foundation, not yet, but for the orchestra's trip to a regional festival. I baked brownies that cracked in the middle and bought 2 pies from the booth that sells nothing else, because I have learned that a person who commits to one thing is usually worth trusting. Mrs. Hart rang the bell on the donation jar and told me she'd retired from PTA president but kept the title in her drawer in case of emergencies. I told her I hoped she'd never have to take it out. She said, "Hope is a plan's favorite cousin." Near the end, Mrs. Lane pulled June aside and spoke to her with both hands. Later, in the car, June said, "She wants me to try a small solo next term." "Not a big one, a beautiful, boring one." She grinned. I told her that's my specialty. That night, after June fell asleep, I drove out to the cabin up on the ridge I never talk about, the one I bought years ago when I thought wanting quiet was a flaw I should hide. The deck boards creaked like they were glad for company. I made coffee on the little stove and took it outside to watch a sky so full of stars it looked like a city without noise. I thought about who I was before all this, how I believed the right blueprint could save a structure from everything but time. I thought about who I am after, how I've learned to design for water rising, for bolts loosening, for the human hand that might choose the shortcut once and the right path next time. When I came back into town, I took the long curve by the river again. The bridge was the same and not the same. Shadows shifted, guardrails salted, a new scratch on the paint where someone had learned parallel parking the hard way. In the reflection, a dark ribbon guessed at spring. I lowered the window and let the night in. Eventually, there was a letter from the court. A guilty plea on the forgery count, a probation term that included community service not near children, a restitution amount for administrative costs that would sting but not ruin. It wasn't justice in the dramatic sense. It was a ledger balancing in a town that had learned the word pattern and decided it didn't like how it felt in its mouth. I held the letter in my hands and waited for the feeling I expected. Relief, triumph, something with a finish line ribbon. What came instead was a steadying, whatever needed doing had been done by the right people in the right rooms. The rest belonged to daylight and repetition. Tune the cello, sign the correct form, ask the second question, speak up when the first answer sounds like close enough. On a Sunday that pretended to be summer, Vanessa knocked on the door and held up a Tupperware of pancakes stacked and cooling. "Too much cinnamon," she said. I poured coffee and we ate at the scarred table, June telling us about a classmate who swore she could hear colors and another who had perfected the art of falling out of a chair without hurting himself or the chair. We laughed, not cautiously, not yet recklessly, just like people who had earned the right to laugh in their own kitchen. After dishes, June headed to the back room to practice. Vanessa lingered at the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," I said, a small smile making room for the old joke. "If there were a list," she said slowly, "of things I could do that would be useful, not performative, would you help me write it?" It was the most unromantic, beautiful question she could have asked. I nodded. "We'll start with small," I said. Small is how bridges don't fail. We sat at the table with a pad and wrote without fanfare. Be early for pickup 3 times in a row. Sit through a rehearsal without touching the phone. Learn the new consent system and teach it to 2 other parents. Bring the beagle to the groomer and report back if he pretends to limp on the table. Tell June the truth when the truth is, I don't know yet. None of it would trend. All of it would hold. The last item was mine. I wrote it at the bottom, then showed her without speechifying. Don't ask Ethan to forget the middle. Ask him to remember the beginning and the work it took to get here. She read it twice, then nodded. I can live with that, she said, and I believed her, because the room didn't sway when she said it. Toward evening, June called us into the living room and played the short solo M's Lane had suggested. It was not grand. It was not meant to be. It sat in the center of the piece like a sturdy step between two longer spans. She ended with her bow hovering, listening for the ring fade out. We clapped, of course, but we stayed quiet for the last resonance like she'd taught us. That's where the music breathes. Later, when the house settled and the street lamp made a small moon on the floor, I stood by the window and watched the world that had once felt like it would disappear under my feet keep existing anyway. I thought about the phrase that started this story for me, the one setting the sirens loose. You don't know the whole story. I don't think anyone ever does. But you can know enough. Enough to speak. Enough to stop certain kinds of harm from getting the benefit of your silence. I turned off the light, and the dark held. In it, I could still count the sounds I had learned to trust. Rain in the gutter. The heater giving up a last sigh. My daughter moving in her bed. A small roll that says a body knows it's safe. A dog dreaming about running on a leg he pretends is weak. And from another room, soft and plain, the lowest string of a cello vibrating because someone brushed it with their hand on the way to turn out the lamp. I don't know if this is a happy ending. I know it's an honest one. I know the deck is higher than it was. I know the river will rise again and we'll lift with it. I know there will be another town and another man who needs applause, and I hope someone there learns from our noise and our quiet both. I know June will keep playing, and Vanessa will keep sweeping, and I will keep counting the sounds that mean we are here. And if you ask me what revenge looks like after everything, I'll tell you the truth. It looks like safety that lasts longer than a headline. It looks like a child who doesn't have to carry a grown-up's story. It looks like 3 plates stacked in a sink, and the small, ordinary miracle of a house that breathes without flinching. It looks like a bridge that holds when no one is watching.